Touchscreen devices and instant access to games weren't always a part of our everyday lives. Long before our pockets included the latest iPhone, gamers were desperate for games on the go. In an extension of the home console wars, the portable gaming wars included battles between Nintendo, Sega, Sony, and yes, even Tiger Electronics. Take a journey back to see the complete evolution of handheld devices, how they influence the modern-day cell phone, and why older generation gamers will never forget the hours spent playing simple LCD games like Snake. Back in the early 1980s, gamers had two main options when it came to video games: visiting arcades or playing a home-based console like the Atari or Sega Master System. The idea of on-the-go gaming was relegated to word searches, crossword puzzles, and finding the hidden images in all those highlights magazines. Then came Nintendo's Game & Watch series. Originally released in 1980, the system would only grow through the years and really set the blueprint for multiple generations of portable gaming. Other consoles like the Adventure Vision and Etch-A-Sketch Animator 2000 offered options, but nothing quite stood out like the Game & Watch. Nintendo used characters like Mario and Donkey Kong to build the system up, but at the end of the day, all the early handheld consoles were simple LCD games with repetitive motions, basic graphics, and very little replay value. Everything changed in 1989 with the release of the Atari Lynx. You thought we were going to say the Game Boy, didn't you? Well, we'll get to that in a second. The Atari Lynx was above and beyond what anyone had ever seen in a handheld console. Consider this. The main Game Boy line didn't feature backlighting until 2003 with the release of the Game Boy Advance SP, so now back in 1989, Atari wasn't just featuring clear and bright backlight options, but they had full color graphics on the 3.5-inch screen. Yeah, the thing was a brick when you loaded it up with 6 AA batteries, but you have to give Atari credit for being ahead of the game. The console had the features, a comfortable design, and games like Chip's Challenge. Yes, it was outsold by the Nintendo Game Boy by 115 million units, but actually, yikes. What the Game Boy lacked in backlights, graphics, and design, they made up for with brand recognition and popular franchises like Super Mario. The original gray Game Boy wouldn't win anything in the looks department, but the console got the job done and would become the baseline for Nintendo's future in the portable console market. Games were sold on cartridges, much like their big brother counterpart known as the NES. Nintendo now had a strong hold on the portable and household market, but there was a speedy hedgehog looking to shake things up. The Sega Master System and Genesis proved to be competitive for Nintendo, and Sega decided to go handheld with the release of the Sega Game Gear. Much like the Atari Lynx, the Game Gear featured a backlit screen and full-color graphics. Released in 1990, the Game Gear had a chance to compete with the Game Boy, but limitations held the console back. The screen not only bulked up the system, but it was a major battery drain. Players would be lucky to get 4 hours of gameplay on 6 batteries. Batteries pretty much became a commodity for anyone with a portable gaming device back in the day. Meanwhile, the original Game Boy used 4 batteries and could last for 15 hours. The smaller size meant kids could also easily carry the Game Boy. Through the early 90s, Game Boy and Tetris led the way, while the Game Gear and Lynx slowly disappeared from store shelves and player interest. Sega and Atari tried their hand at console sequels, but without the same success. The Lynx 2 was essentially an upgraded Lynx with the same game library, but the expanded battery life and lighter system was not enough. Don't worry though, the discount bin at KB Toys was also stuffed full of the Sega Nomad. The Nomad was a follow-up to the Game Gear, and the handheld cleverly used Sega Genesis cartridges to run games. For players, it meant you didn't have to double dip on game purchases like you would with the SNES and Game Boy. The 3.5-inch screen had great visuals, but once again, the battery life was terrible. Unfortunately for Sega, the Nomad was released at the wrong time. The Game Boy was still thriving, and the spin-off Game Boy Pocket featured even more battery life and easier storage options. But that wasn't the worst of it. In 1998, the Game Boy eliminated all of the competition with just one word: Pokémon. Pokémon Red and Blue took the world by storm, and the exclusive Game Boy access left all the other consoles in the dust. As Sega and Atari fell off the handheld map, other competitors tried and failed to challenge the Game Boy. While Tiger Electronics was known for tossing pop culture licenses on cheap LCD games, they offered a legitimate contender in the form of the Game.com handheld device. With a touchscreen stylus, PDA-styled apps, game cartridges, and internet connections, the console had a lot of features, but not enough HP to even challenge the world of Nintendo and Pokémon. The Game.com only sold a disappointing 300,000 units. Not only was Pokémon helping the Game Boy dominate, but so did the 1998 release of the Game Boy Color. The color upgrade was a nice touch and still featured compatibility with every original Game Boy cartridge. Backwards compatibility would become a common theme for Nintendo to help keep loyal fans around. The early 2000s saw little competition in the handheld market. Cell phones were becoming more mainstream, but the main source of phone gaming came in the form of Snake, where players would guide a snake around to eat apples. Not quite Super Mario Bros., so the release of the Game Boy Advance gave Nintendo a huge advantage. But the open field was not met with open arms. The original Advance was a little clunky and despite graphics improvements still did not feature any backlighting, or the features found on other comparable handhelds. Players expected more, and Nintendo finally delivered with the Advance SP. A bright backlit screen, rechargeable battery, and flip-open form factor were just a few upgrades that allowed the Advance SP to thrive. Nintendo really delivered with fan requests, and the Pokémon franchise continued to thrive with the release of Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire. So while Nintendo was dominating the handheld realm, a botched partnership with Sony led to a new home console war. The PlayStation was now a common household name, and Sony wanted to take out Nintendo on all sides. While many point to the PSP as the first Sony handheld, it actually came in the form of the Pocket Station. Released in 1999, the Pocket Station was essentially a PS1 memory card with a small screen and input buttons. Players can download mini-games and use the Pocket Station on the go. The console was more of a novelty, but it set the stage for the future of Sony gaming years down the line. Meanwhile, Nintendo had to fight off a whole other electronics realm: cell phones. It would take years before the company would even consider releasing an app in the form of Super Mario Run, but back in 2003, the gaming industry could see clues of what was to come for the world of portable gaming. This was the year Nokia released the N-Gage. The phone and gaming console combination was unheard of back in 2003. Phones and games were completely separate, but Nokia set out to change that. The company managed to attract some pretty big game licenses, including Tomb Raider, WWE, Tony Hawk, Crash Bandicoot, and the MLB. The N-Gage sold 3 million units, but was more of a proof of concept than a true competitor to the Game Boy. As cell phones advanced, so did the next generation of portable gaming consoles. The 2004 holiday season saw the release of both the Nintendo DS and the Sony PlayStation Portable, known better as the PSP. Nintendo took the flip screen of the Advance SP and decided to toss in another screen, a touchscreen at that. Games would feature touchscreen maps, menu options, and interactive features used to make games more creative. The DS featured a small cartridge design but would still include a slot for Game Boy Advance games. And with the release of the Nintendo DS came an entire family of them. If you thought Bowser's children were hard to keep track of, just try following the DS family tree. Here we go. The DS Lite was released in 2006 and featured a larger screen with a smaller outer shell. Nintendo went back to the drawing board again with the DSi. Goodbye advanced cartridge compatibility and hello to digital cameras, better online connectivity, and a much bigger screen. But you know that screen wasn't quite big enough, so Nintendo released the DSi XL with an impressive pair of 4.2-inch screens. Naturally, the DS sold like crazy, becoming one of the biggest selling consoles of all time, only outpaced by the PS2. But the Sony PSP was far from a failure. Selling over 80 million units, the PSP brought advanced graphics, a large screen, and the classic PlayStation controls players loved and were used to. The console utilized the Memory Stick Pro and Sony's UMD format, which would hold both games and movies. Finally, after more than a decade of dominance, Nintendo had a true competitor in handheld gaming, but it wouldn't last for long. The handheld market was in question as companies like Apple and Samsung became major players in the handheld gaming market. Apps like Angry Birds, Candy Crush, and Minecraft became easily accessible, and you didn't even have to buy a separate cartridge. iPhones became so advanced you could eventually play Fortnite on the phone. Nintendo stuck to their handheld market, however, developing a successor to the DSi with the 3DS. Advanced graphics and 3D visuals were impressive, but the 3DS sales have not even come close to the DS sales. And you can attribute a lot of that to phone-based gaming. Like Nintendo, Sony stuck around and released the PlayStation Vita in early 2012. Nearly a year after Nintendo launched the 3DS. Touchscreen features, impressive graphics, and classic PS1 games weren't enough though. The competition proved to be too much and the PS Vita fell off the map. Sony seemed to lose interest in handhelds right around the same time they released the Vita. Now, Sony wants to use their home console to encompass the handheld world. Thanks to services like the PS4 Remote Play, a dedicated handheld isn't needed as players use phones and tablets to connect directly to their home console. Meanwhile, Nintendo stuck to their handheld gaming platform in a whole new way with the Nintendo Switch in 2017. The console was optimized for both TV and handheld mode, pretty much making the 3DS obsolete in the process. The Switch features an amazing lineup of games, including Breath of the Wild and Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. The removable Joy-Con controllers work for single-player and multiplayer modes, giving the console a huge social aspect while in portable mode. 2019's Switch Lite is a handheld-only version of the console, which dedicated portable gamers have come to appreciate for the lower price and digital library of games to choose from. Cartridges are still sold, but the digital games make it a lot easier to travel with your favorite titles. The Switch proved that Nintendo could outsmart the mobile community and provides a true focus on gaming. As Switch sales continue to soar, we could see even more advancements in the future. A Switch Pro or a PC gaming device could offer cloud-based gaming, easy connection options, and some crisp 4K graphics power. Even with so much reliance on phones, there will always be a market for handheld gaming, especially when the games are great. So, what's your favorite handheld console of all time? Would you rather play games on your cell phone? Do you prefer the Switch Lite over the 3DS? Should Sony release a new handheld or stick with remote play options? Well, let us know in the comments down below. Thanks for watching and don't forget to subscribe to The Gamer for more great content.